For officers Rickman and Mills, abuse of power had become routine. They harassed, threatened, and brutalized without consequence, believing the badge made them untouchable. So when they saw Brianna Freeman, black, alone, and well-dressed, stepping out of a luxury boutique, they didn't hesitate. They assumed she didn't belong, accused her of theft, and slammed her to the ground when she resisted their control. She looked like an easy target. What they didn't know was that her husband, Jalen Freeman, was a Delta Force commander, trained, lethal, and nearby. He saw everything, and when they laid hands on his wife, their authority met its match. They thought it would go the way it always had, but this time, they chose the wrong couple. And now, the Freemans are coming for justice, with the truth, with discipline, and with nothing left to lose. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe. The afternoon sun bathed Atlanta's Buckhead district in a golden hush, casting long shadows beneath the palms that lined the sidewalks and glinting off the chrome trim of polished SUVs parked along the street. The air was warm and still, heavy with the fragrance of magnolias and the faint scent of expensive colognes, trailing from boutique doors that seemed to open only for a certain kind of customer. Brianna Freeman stepped onto the sidewalk from the cool interior of Levesque's, one of the city's most exclusive clothing stores, where velvet-lined fitting rooms and quiet, eager saleswomen promised elegance in every seam. She held a slim shopping bag in her left hand and her phone in the other, eyes flicking briefly across the screen to check the time. She smiled when she saw the message, "Circling the block. Be there in 5." She tapped a quick reply, tucked the phone into her purse, and started down the sidewalk with the quiet poise of a woman who belonged, not because of her money or the dress in her bag, but because she had fought hard for this kind of ordinary peace. Her green dress shimmered softly with each step, flowing around her legs, her heels clicking confidently as she walked. A few heads turned. She didn't notice, or pretended not to. Brianna wasn't used to taking time for herself, not really. As a high-powered defense attorney in the city's most cutthroat law firm, her days were usually packed with filings, hearings, and holding her own across conference tables lined with older men who still underestimated her until she opened her mouth. But today was different. Today was for her, for them. Jalen had insisted. It had taken 3 calendar reschedules, 1 firm cancellation, and a playful but stern, "I didn't leave Delta just to spend our lives apart," before she finally agreed to a break. And now here she was, with a soft new dress and a smile that lingered quietly beneath her surface. She reached the corner and paused beneath the shade of a decorative awning. From this spot, she could see a sliver of the main road where Jalen would eventually pull up in their matte black SUV. His taste had always leaned practical, military, clean, silent, efficient. But she had convinced him to add a few comforts. Leather seats, heated steering wheel. It was one of the many things they had learned to meet in the middle on. Their marriage wasn't flashy. It was solid, built on the foundation of shared ambition, trust, and survival. They had both lived through the kinds of storms that left other people hollow. Jalen rarely spoke of his time overseas, but sometimes when the house was too quiet, she could hear it in the way he breathed. And she, too, carried her own shadows. Disappointments, sacrifices, the small daily cuts of being the only black woman in the room, again and again, required to be twice as composed just to be seen as enough. As she stood by the awning, waiting, she noticed it again. That shift, the subtle change in air that black women in America were trained to feel. Attention, not loud or obvious, but there all the same. A passing glance held too long. A security guard inside the boutique who had lingered a little too close as she paid, pretending to tidy the jewelry case. The way the 2 women leaving the cafe across the street had looked her up and down, not out of admiration, but calculation. Brianna wasn't a stranger to it. She didn't wear her success as armor, but she understood that in places like this, where wealth and whiteness often blended into the same fabric, Her presence still came with a question mark she hadn't written. She adjusted the strap of her purse and looked down the street again, eyes scanning calmly. Still no sign of Jalen's car, but she wasn't worried. He was probably caught in traffic at the light, or chatting with the old veteran who ran the cigar shop 2 blocks over. Jalen had a way of finding conversations wherever he went, but with her, he always made it back on time. She took a slow breath and looked back toward the store. Through the tinted glass, she could still see the saleswoman who had helped her, now chatting with another customer. It had been a pleasant enough experience, even if the woman had initially assumed she was browsing for someone else. That was always the first assumption. But Brianna knew how to correct people with poise. She turned again, watching a patrol car roll to a stop across the street. 2 officers stepped out casually, stretching their legs. She didn't pay them much attention at first. They were just part of the background, like the valet boys and dog walkers that moved along this district in a steady rhythm. And yet, she felt the pause, that subtle disruption in her surroundings, a hesitation where there should have been motion. One of the officers was looking at her. She straightened her shoulders without meaning to and turned back toward the road, her eyes returning to her phone screen. Still no new message, but her fingers hovered for a moment. Her instincts, not loud yet, but alert. She knew the way a gaze could follow too long, and she knew what it could mean when attention shifted from curiosity to entitlement. Still, she told herself, it was just another quiet day. Another sunny afternoon where she had done nothing wrong, where she could wait for her husband in peace. She just didn't know that peace was about to end. Brianna adjusted the strap of her purse on her shoulder as she stepped further from the boutique entrance, letting her eyes wander down the block once more. The sunlight had shifted slightly, casting a soft golden hue across the sidewalk as the distant sound of a delivery truck rumbled through the adjacent intersection. The dress in her shopping bag swayed gently with her movement, and for a moment she allowed herself to feel the quiet satisfaction of this small, well-earned indulgence. Her fingers hovered near her phone, debating whether to call Jalen or just wait until she spotted the familiar sleek silhouette of their SUV. She trusted he'd be close, always punctual, always precise, but there was something oddly still in the air, a kind of pause in the natural rhythm of the street that made her glance over her shoulder. Behind her, across the street, 2 police officers stood by their cruiser with the relaxed posture of men who didn't need to hurry. One was older, broad and square-shouldered, his expression unreadable beneath the shadow of his cap. The other, younger and leaner, leaned against the hood of the car, his gaze flickering up briefly from a phone in his hand. She didn't recognize them, nor did she particularly care to. Still, instinct told her they were looking too long. She returned her attention to the sidewalk ahead, her pace smooth and unhurried. But it wasn't long before the steady beat of footsteps broke the ambient buzz of the street again. Measured, deliberate, the kind of walk meant to be heard. Brianna's shoulders tensed slightly, her expression composed as she kept walking. "Afternoon, ma'am," a voice called from behind, calm and performed, with the polished veneer of politeness that felt more like control than courtesy. She stopped, turning slightly to meet the source of the voice. The older officer, Rickman, she now saw from the badge nestled under the edge of his vest, stood a few paces away, one hand resting on his belt, the other gesturing casually as if this were the beginning of any normal civil exchange. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" he said, offering a smile that didn't seem to reach his eyes, his gaze lingering on her just a little too long. Brianna returned a courteous nod, choosing her words with measured calm. "It is." He stepped a bit closer, casually, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. "You shop around here often?" he asked, nodding toward the bag at her side, his voice low and conversational, though the undercurrent of something else, curiosity, entitlement, was already sliding beneath the surface. "From time to time," she replied, adjusting her posture slightly. Not defensive, just firmer. "Levex," he continued, tilting his head as if to study her more closely. "Nice place." That's where you were just now, right? Not too many folks walk out of there with something in hand, especially looking like that. The way he said it, lightly, with a forced air of charm, made her pulse tighten. She forced a neutral tone. Yes, I made a purchase. Looks like you made the place look better walking out than it did when you walked in, Rickman added, eyes scanning her figure with open boldness now. Gotta say, that dress does wonders for your shape. I'm meeting someone, she said, no longer playing along. So, I'll be going. Rickman let out a short chuckle, gesturing toward the sidewalk ahead of her. We can walk with you. Make sure you stay safe. Plenty of eyes out here, but not all of them friendly. Mills, his partner, finally approached from behind, saying nothing, but standing close enough to make his silent presence feel like another wall closing in. He avoided Brianna's eyes, his posture unsure, his hands twitching at his sides. Rickman grinned. You don't need to be in such a rush. Man like that ought to be lucky to have a woman like you. I said I'm meeting my husband, she repeated, slower this time, more pointed. And I'm not interested in conversation. Rickman raised his eyebrows, feigning offense, though his smile never fully faded. Whoa now, didn't mean to step on any toes. You don't have to get defensive. You followed me. You're making comments about my body, and you're standing far too close for comfort. That's not a conversation. Well, maybe I just appreciate confidence, Rickman replied, folding his arms. You've got that don't talk to me attitude like you own this street. I figured you must have known somebody important. Brianna straightened her shoulders, her voice cool and clipped. I know myself. That's enough. Rickman chuckled again, but this time it was quieter, more bitter around the edges. I see how it is. You think you're better than the rest of us. She turned to walk past him. I think this conversation is over. He stepped into her path before she could pass, his smile gone now. Hold on. Where are you rushing off to? I told you. I'm meeting someone. If there's no official reason to detain me, I'll be going. Rickman's voice lowered. Why so anxious, ma'am? We're just asking some questions. Seems like you're trying awful hard to leave. Brianna's lips pressed into a line. Because I have every right to. Rickman leaned in, his tone shifting completely. People shoplift out of that store all the time, you know. Don't matter how they're dressed. Sometimes the ones who look the part are the ones you have to watch closest. Mills cleared his throat. Rickman raised a hand to silence him. It's our duty to follow up on suspicious activity. Just doing our jobs. There was nothing suspicious about me, Brianna said. You approached me. You created this. Then prove me wrong, Rickman said, nodding toward the shopping bag. Let's take a look. Just the receipt. That's all. Brianna took a step back. No, you have no right to search my bag. And you know it. Rickman's tone flattened. Then I'll have to consider your refusal to cooperate part of a larger problem. She narrowed her eyes. Which is? Possible shoplifting, he replied, tapping his radio. You match a description. Black female, dress, leaving Levex with a suspicious item. Brianna stared at him. There was no report. You just made that up. Rickman tilted his head. How would you know that? Unless you had something to hide. She opened her mouth to respond, but the air shifted again. Sharper now, colder, though the sun still burned overhead. Let's not do this here, he added. Unless you want this to get louder. Brianna stood her ground, shoulders squared beneath the weight of the officer's gaze, her jaw set in firm control. The sun still shone down on Peachtree Street, as if nothing had shifted. But everything had. A line had been crossed, and she knew it the moment Rickman tapped his radio and invoked a lie. A false report. A made-up description. A trap disguised as protocol. Let's not do this here, Rickman repeated, his voice tight with manufactured concern. We're just trying to sort things out. There's nothing to sort out, Brianna said, keeping her tone level even as her pulse thudded in her ears. You're inventing a situation to justify your behavior. Rickman laughed, but the sound was dry and humorless. No one's inventing anything, but when someone refuses a lawful request, it tends to raise flags. "You asked to see inside my bag without cause," she replied, "and I said no, which I have the legal right to do." Mills stepped forward slightly, looking between them with unease. "Maybe we should just—" Rickman cut him off with a glance, his jaw flexing. "She's escalating this." Brianna took a slow breath, raising her hands just slightly in a gesture of peace. Not surrender, but restraint. "Look, I don't want this to become something it doesn't need to be. I've done nothing wrong. If you have legitimate concerns, I'll be happy to answer questions, with proper cause, and in the presence of my attorney." Rickman's eyes narrowed. "Your attorney?" "Yes," she said. "I'm an attorney myself, and I know exactly where this is going." He stepped in closer now, his chest nearly brushing hers. "Where it's going," he said through clenched teeth, "is wherever I say it goes. You think flashing your degrees or your name makes you untouchable? I think the law makes me untouchable when I haven't broken it," she answered, her voice shaking with tension, not fear. "You people are all the same," Rickman muttered. "Walk around dressed like royalty, talking like the world owes you something, just waiting for someone to say no so you can start yelling racism and lawsuit. That's the game, isn't it?" Brianna blinked, stunned. "Did you just say—" "You heard me," he snapped. "Officer, I suggest you step back right now." Rickman's hand shot out, gripping her wrist with sudden force. She gasped. "Let go of me!" "You're under investigation," he barked. "Stop resisting." "I'm not resisting," she protested, twisting away instinctively. Mills hesitated, his hand twitching near his belt. But he didn't move. Rickman yanked harder, wrenching her arm up behind her back. The shopping bag fell to the pavement with a soft thud, the tissue paper fluttering like leaves against the sidewalk. "You're hurting me," she said. Breath caught in her throat. "You should have complied." With one swift movement, Rickman swept her legs out from under her. The ground rushed up, and Brianna's shoulder hit the pavement hard, the impact reverberating through her bones. Her cheek scraped against the concrete, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. Her arm was still twisted behind her, and Rickman's knee pressed firmly into her back. "Don't move," he growled. She gasped against the heat of the sidewalk. "Please, you don't have to do this. I gave you a chance," Rickman muttered, leaning down so close she could feel his breath. "But you people never know when to shut up." Mills took a half step forward. "Rick, I don't think—" "Get the cuffs," Rickman snapped. "Now." Mills reached for them with trembling fingers. "I didn't steal anything," Brianna said, her voice hoarse as she struggled to speak. "You're assaulting me. I told you. My receipt is in my purse." "Sure it is," Rickman said coldly. "And I'm the mayor of Atlanta." "You're lying," she spat, pain radiating from her shoulder. "You know I didn't do anything. You were acting suspicious, refused to comply, matched a description. That's all the report needs to say." She turned her head slightly, eyes burning. "There was no report." "There is now." Rickman cinched the cuffs around her wrists with a sharp click. The metal bit into her skin. From nearby, someone shouted. Faint, uncertain. A woman standing by the valet post was recording. A man in a business suit across the street had stopped walking, phone in hand, his expression unreadable. And still, no one stepped in. "Let me go," Brianna said again, louder this time. "Please, someone, help me!" Rickman tightened his grip on her shoulder. "You're done talking." Then, with calculated cruelty, he drove his elbow into her ribs. The air fled her lungs, her body curling slightly in response before he forced her flat again. Mills flinched. "That's enough!" Rickman glared at him but didn't say a word. Brianna lay still, gasping. Her vision blurred at the edges. The moment dragged, long, humiliating, and raw. The hot pavement scorched her skin through the fabric of her dress, and the taste of blood had begun to rise faintly in the back of her throat. And still, no sign of Jalen, her husband, who she knew without a doubt would be looking for her by now, her protector, her peace. But she also knew what it would mean if he showed up now, what it might cost him to step into this chaos. Rickman stood up and adjusted his vest, yanking her roughly to her feet. Her knees wobbled, her body folding slightly from the blow. "Let's go," he said. "You're under arrest." "For what?" she asked through clenched teeth. "Obstruction, resisting, and theft," he replied flatly. "We'll sort it out at the station." Her voice cracked. "This is a mistake." "No," he muttered, as he pulled her toward the cruiser. "This is a message." And just as she stumbled toward the open door of the patrol car, a voice rose behind them, louder than the crowd, louder than the siren. "What are you doing to my wife?" Rickman turned his head, and in that instant, Jalen Freeman was already running. Jalen Freeman was already moving before his mind could catch up to what his eyes were telling him. The image hit him like a gut punch. Brianna, his wife, his partner, her body bent beneath the weight of two officers, her face twisted in pain, her arms restrained behind her back, and her beautiful green dress streaked with dirt and asphalt. One officer had her arm, the other her waist, and in that one sickening second, Jalen saw Rickman's elbow land in her ribs. Everything inside him turned to fire. He didn't shout her name. He didn't call out in panic. He sprinted. The crowd had grown in size now, people standing at a distance, phones raised like shields, their faces a mixture of shock, discomfort, and disbelief. Some were murmuring, others whispering to each other, but no one stepped in. Not yet. Jalen's footsteps tore across the street, his boots slamming against the pavement with practiced rhythm. The moment felt slowed, like time had staggered under the weight of what he'd just witnessed. His mind was a blade, already slicing through options, calculating the risk, preparing his body to do what needed to be done. "Get your hands off my wife," he bellowed, his voice like a whip crack in the open air. Rickman turned, clearly annoyed by the interruption, only for his expression to falter slightly at the sheer force bearing down on him. Jalen wasn't just angry. He was storming forward with purpose, eyes locked in a way that told any trained man that trouble was coming fast. "Step back!" Rickman shouted, raising a hand to block him. "This is a police matter." "She's not resisting," Jalen growled, closing the distance in 3 long strides. "I saw you hit her." Mills reached for his belt, his hand brushing the hilt of his baton, but his nerves betrayed him. His body wasn't prepared for what came next. Rickman stepped forward, attempting to chest Jalen back. "You need to back off now, or—" Jalen moved. He struck Rickman with the heel of his palm, hard and sharp, just beneath the officer's chin. It was quick, calculated, and designed to disorient without causing permanent damage. Rickman staggered back 2 steps, off balance, arms flailing slightly, as he struggled to recover from the sudden jolt. Mills lunged, trying to flank Jalen, but he wasn't fast enough. Jalen pivoted, sweeping low and driving his shoulder into Mills's midsection, using his momentum to drive the officer into the side of the cruiser. The impact was solid, controlled, not reckless, and Mills let out a shocked grunt as his breath left him. Jalen didn't pause. He pressed his forearm against Mills's chest, pinning him with just enough pressure to warn him not to try it again. "Put her down!" Jalen shouted, eyes flicking back to Rickman, who was already recovering, anger blazing now across his face. Rickman wiped the corner of his mouth where a line of spit hung, then reached for his taser. "You just assaulted an officer!" he barked. "You're done." "No," Jalen said, voice low, dangerous. "You are." Brianna, still cuffed, struggled to turn herself upright. Her voice was weak, cracked from the earlier blow. "Jalen, don't!" But it was too late. Rickman lunged. Jalen turned just enough to let the taser arm graze past his shoulder. He grabbed Rickman's wrist mid-lunge and twisted it sharply downward. The taser clattered to the ground. With his other hand, Jalen slammed the edge of his palm into Rickman's shoulder, forcing him to drop further. Then came the elbow, clean, fast, to the side of Rickman's head. The older officer dropped to a knee, dazed, teeth clenched in pain. Jalen breathed hard, his stance low, feet planted. Every movement had purpose. He hadn't trained for street fights. He had trained for close-quarter combat under pressure, in dirt, in sand, in places where the enemy wore the same face as your friend. And right now, these men weren't peacekeepers. They were predators. A woman in the crowd gasped audibly as Rickman fell. Someone else shouted, "He's military!" as if trying to explain what they were witnessing. Mills scrambled back to his feet and swung wide, baton now fully drawn. He rushed in, hoping to catch Jalen off guard. But Jalen ducked low and delivered a hard palm strike to the inside of Mills's knee. The younger officer dropped with a yelp, clutching his leg in sudden pain. Rickman charged again. This time, Jalen met him head-on. They collided with the corner of the cruiser, fists flying. Rickman was stronger than he looked, but he was sloppy, angry, and reckless. Jalen ducked the first wild hook and landed 2 rapid blows to Rickman's ribs, following it with a knee to the gut. Rickman stumbled, coughing, but still upright. Jalen grabbed the back of his vest and slammed him against the hood of the car. The crowd jolted as Rickman's body bounced off the metal, groaning. Brianna's breath trembled as she struggled upright again, the cuffs digging into her wrists. She saw Jalen, eyes blazing, fists clenched, posture poised, and she knew. He was in it now. This wasn't reaction anymore. This was war. Mills came again, swinging from behind. Jalen turned at the last second, ducked, and lifted, throwing the smaller officer clean over his shoulder. Mills landed on the sidewalk with a hard thud, groaning. Jalen stood in front of Brianna now, between her and the men who'd hurt her. His voice was steel. "Touch her again, and I swear you'll never walk straight again." Rickman coughed, staggering upright, his hand trembling as it reached for his radio. Jalen stepped forward. "I'm not done." Rickman's hand slammed down on his radio, voice breathless and furious as it cracked through the static. "Unit 342 requesting immediate backup. Officer down. Suspect is violent. Military trained. Send all available units." Across the street, a valet froze mid-step. People were backing away now, phones still recording, voices rising in a mix of shock, fear, and disbelief. Somewhere, a car alarm wailed as someone tripped against a parked vehicle in the chaos. The moment was no longer just a confrontation. It had become a war zone in the middle of Buckhead. Jalen didn't flinch. He stood tall, body heaving from the blows he had delivered and the ones he'd absorbed. Blood trickled from the corner of his lip, and a thin gash ran across the side of his brow where Mills's baton had connected in a lucky swing. But his eyes never wavered. His body remained locked in a stance bred from years of conditioning. Solid, balanced, lethal. Rickman didn't wait for the backup he'd called for. Pride and rage had taken hold. He lunged again, this time going for Jalen's midsection, trying to tackle him to the ground in a desperate show of brute force. Jalen dropped his weight back, bracing himself, then twisted sideways, allowing Rickman's momentum to carry them both into the open street. They hit the asphalt hard, shoulders slamming into the pavement, grunts tearing from their chests. Rickman landed a punch, square across Jalen's jaw. The hit stunned him for a half-second. His vision blurred, and his head snapped to the side. The taste of copper bloomed in his mouth. Rickman took the moment to grab a handful of Jalen's shirt collar and yank him halfway up. "Think you're tough, boy? You're just another angry—" The rest of the sentence never came. Jalen's head snapped forward, smashing into Rickman's nose with a brutal crack. Blood sprayed instantly, and the officer let out a howl, falling backward, clutching his face. Jalen rolled to his feet, wiping the blood from his lip with the back of his hand, the metallic taste still sharp on his tongue. His face was calm, terrifyingly so, and behind his eyes burned a fire that would not go out until Brianna was safe. Mills charged him from behind, this time not holding back. He swung his baton in a wild arc aimed for Jalen's ribs. It landed. Jalen gasped, doubling slightly as the pain ignited along his side, but he didn't fall. Instead, he pivoted, catching Mills's arm before the second swing could land. With one hand gripping the wrist and the other locking under the elbow, Jalen turned his hips and forced the joint in the opposite direction. Mills screamed. The baton dropped. Jalen didn't hesitate. He swept Mills's legs out and drove him to the ground, pinning him with one knee on his back. He looked down at him, panting. "You picked the wrong couple today." Behind him, Rickman was back on his feet, face bloodied, nostrils flaring. He reached for his sidearm. The crowd screamed, "Gun! Don't do it!" Jalen spun, saw the movement. His instincts kicked in before thought could. He closed the gap in 2 strides and slammed into Rickman just as the weapon cleared the holster. The gun clattered to the pavement and skidded under a parked car. Jalen roared as he threw Rickman back against the cruiser, one arm around his throat, the other driving punch after punch into his torso. "You think you can put your hands on my wife? You think I won't answer for that?" Rickman tried to fight back, fists flailing, but they were clumsy now. More survival than skill. He landed another strike to Jalen's side, hitting the same bruised rib from earlier. Jalen staggered, pain blooming down his side, and Rickman pounced, slamming his head into Jalen's collarbone. Jalen groaned, but held his ground. He gripped Rickman's vest, pivoted his weight, and slammed him hard to the ground. The impact cracked the concrete beneath them. Rickman didn't get back up. Jalen stood over him, chest rising and falling, his arms shaking. Not from fear, but from restraint. He could have ended him, right there, but he didn't. Behind him, Mills groaned on the ground, barely conscious. Brianna was kneeling now, her wrists still bound behind her, eyes wide with pain and disbelief. Her lip was split, and her voice trembled. "Jalen!" He turned, his breath catching at the sight of her. "I've got you," he said. "I've got you, baby." The sirens began to wail in the distance, still far, but coming fast. He rushed to her, kneeling as gently as he could. His fingers worked quickly at the cuffs. They weren't police-grade, cheap flex cuffs, poorly applied. He popped them free. Brianna cried out softly as her arms fell forward, circulation returning in sharp needles. Jalen caught her before she could fall, and held her close, one hand behind her head. "We have to go," she whispered. "I know," he said. "Now." He nodded once. Behind them, Rickman groaned, trying to push himself up. Jalen turned toward him, and for one tense moment, the 2 men locked eyes. No words were spoken. Jalen scooped Brianna into his arms, ignoring the pain in his ribs, the sweat and blood on his skin, and the eyes of the crowd still staring, still filming. The people parted for them. No one moved to stop them. As they disappeared into the alleyway behind the boutique, tires screamed at the end of the block. The hunt had begun. The sirens tore through the silence like claws raking across glass, splitting the quiet hum of the city with urgency and fury. They echoed through alleys and over rooftops, bouncing off polished storefronts and narrow brick corridors, as if the entire city had been given a single command: hunt. Jalen gripped Brianna's hand firmly, not just to guide her, but to keep her grounded. Her steps were uneven at first, her body still rattled from the assault, her mind trying to keep pace with the present after the chaos had ruptured every sense of peace they'd known. He moved with practiced urgency, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings, calculating every angle, every blind spot, every shadow that might hide danger or escape. The sharp pain that radiated from his side where the baton had landed earlier pulsed with each movement, but he kept going. There was no room for hesitation, no space for pain. Brianna was beside him, her breath shallow, her green dress torn near the hem, her wrists raw, where the flex cuffs had bitten into her skin. The blood on her lip had dried into a sharp copper line. She hadn't cried. She wouldn't. Not yet. They moved like ghosts through the alleyways, slipping behind locked gates, stepping over trash bins, navigating narrow paths between buildings that Jalen remembered from years ago when he'd studied escape routes for missions far from home. His instincts weren't just intact, they were burning. "We keep east," he said, as they darted behind a boarded-up storefront, the low hum of passing cruisers barely missing them by a breath. "Stay low, keep in shadow. No phones, no credit cards. They'll be tracking everything now." Brianna nodded, her voice thin but steady. "I left my phone in my bag. They have it. Good. We don't need them tracing you." From this point forward, we go dark. They slipped past a delivery truck idling in a side lot and ducked through the gate of a small church parking area. The building's floodlights hadn't kicked on yet, which gave them just enough cover to slide behind a series of hedges before making their way toward the back of a residential alley. The world hadn't stopped moving. Cars still passed, music still played somewhere faintly from a rooftop bar, but the normalcy of the world outside didn't matter anymore. The weight of what had just happened pressed into them like a fog. For those watching from their apartments, behind their screens, or from the edge of the sidewalk with phones still recording, they were no longer a husband and wife. They were fugitives. Dangerous. Black. Jalen's mind moved ahead. He didn't speak as they turned down a narrow walkway behind an apartment building where broken fences revealed a gap between properties. But he was already forming the next step, already reaching for the network he hadn't touched in years. As they emerged on the far side of the alley, he pulled out a small, scratched phone from inside his boot, a burner he hadn't used since the last time he helped extract a fellow soldier out of international waters. He powered it on, waited the 6 seconds for the secure module to load, then tapped into a hidden contact chain buried in encrypted code. He didn't look up as he typed, the rhythm familiar, the sense of purpose sharp. Call sign, orbital, status, secure, requesting extraction protocol, civilian compromised, pursuit active, need safe house access. Within 20 seconds, the screen blinked again. Alpha 3 Safe House. Access point through Bellflower Apartments. Underground garage. Side entrance only. No lights. ETA. 17 minutes on foot. Quiet route, advised. Jalen turned to Brianna, his voice low, steady. We've got a place, not far. Off-grid. Friend of mine from before. He's reliable. She looked up at him, her face pale but her eyes burning with clarity. Military? Used to run communication lines off record. Helped extract civilians during unlisted ops. He still owes me. This safe house is buried in the back of a garage beneath a closed complex. No surveillance. No neighbors. They moved fast, cutting through a narrow pedestrian path between buildings and crossing beneath a canopy of overgrown ivy that shaded the back lot of an old abandoned preschool. The city shifted around them as they traveled. Clean sidewalks gave way to cracked pavement, and the polished edges of Buckhead began to erode behind them. In the distance, another siren cut the air. It was closer now. When they reached the access point, an old, dented metal door behind a row of shuttered storage units, Jalen keyed in the passcode from memory. The keypad clicked, the lock disengaged, and the door groaned open just wide enough for them to slip inside. The underground parking structure was empty, save for a few abandoned vehicles and oil-stained concrete. At the far end, a storage bay stood slightly ajar, its heavy sliding door blending into the shadow of the wall. Inside was a single cot, a table, a shelf of canned food, water jugs, and an old tactical bin with faded lettering. A single exposed bulb hung from the ceiling, casting a warm, humming light over everything. Brianna collapsed onto the cot, not in exhaustion, but in release. Her breathing slowed, controlled but heavy. And for a long moment, she said nothing. Jalen stood near the door, listening to the silence, watching the flicker of the single light bulb. When he finally turned to her, his voice was softer. "Are you okay?" She nodded, but only once. "I think I left my voice back there," she said, eyes cast down at her hands, which were still trembling faintly. "I couldn't even speak at the end. I just froze." He walked to her slowly, crouching beside her. "You didn't freeze. You survived. You made it out. You're here." Her eyes lifted. "They'll twist it. All of it. The video, the angles. They'll take what you did and turn it into something savage." "They already have," Jalen replied. He gestured toward the small TV mounted in the upper corner of the garage. A breaking news report flickered across the screen. No sound, just captions. "Suspects wanted for assault on officers. Considered armed and dangerous." Brianna's throat tightened. "They're not going to stop. They'll come for our careers." our names, everything. Then we stopped them first. He crossed to the bin and retrieved a compact laptop wrapped in cloth and stashed beneath a bundle of tools. It was slow to boot, but powerful. Still linked to an encrypted satellite network Jalen hadn't used since his last contract. He set it on the table and opened a terminal window. First, we wipe our trail, he said. Second, we monitor their communications. Radio chatter, dispatch logs, media leaks, everything they say about us. We intercept. Brianna stood now, her balance firming as her clarity returned. And then we start building our case. He glanced at her, one eyebrow lifted. We expose them, she said. Not just what happened today. All of it. Their history. Complaints. Any dirt that was buried. We drag it into the light. Jalen smiled faintly. The first real trace of it since the day began. Then let's build the fire. The sun had barely cracked the sky when the first squad car rolled past Brianna's former office on Forsyth Street. Lights flashing, tires screeching against the pavement. Within the hour, the entire city seemed to be pulsing with one coordinated command. Find them. The manhunt began with surgical precision. Door knocks, public statements, strategically placed press updates, and constant pressure on every street camera and license plate reader from Midtown to Decatur. By the time the morning news cycles refreshed, every station had a still of Jalen and Brianna plastered across their homepage, cropped from shaky bystander footage. The videos circulating online weren't full. They were edited, clipped at just the right second to show a blur of motion, a flash of fists, an image of Jalen overpowering two uniformed officers, and a caption that made the lie feel true. Former soldier attacks police in Buckhead. Wife accomplice. In every grocery store, every gas station, every downtown cafe with a wall-mounted TV, their faces glared back in frozen frames, framed by words like fugitive, hostile, and armed. The footage never showed Brianna pinned to the ground, never showed the moment Rickman's elbow struck her ribs, or the way her voice broke when she tried to say she was a lawyer. All of that had been cut, edited, discarded. At the firm, Brianna's desk sat untouched, her computer locked behind a security code no one could override. But that didn't stop the questions. HR was called into emergency meetings. Partners whispered in closed-door rooms, wondering how this could be happening. A junior associate was pulled aside for questioning, asked if she'd ever seen Brianna behave erratically. Another was grilled on whether Brianna had expressed any political opinions that might seem extreme. No one asked how she had handled 10 years of high-profile cases with elegance, or how many pro bono hours she had logged defending people the system left behind. Instead, someone quietly printed out a copy of her resignation form and slid it into a sealed envelope, just in case the board decided to distance themselves preemptively. Across the city, Jalen's name began surfacing in old classified documents. His deployments, commendations, combat zones. Someone leaked pieces of his service record to the press. Not the parts that told the truth of what he'd done to protect lives, but the vague, incomplete parts. Special Forces operative involved in covert conflict. A commentator on a late-night panel referred to him as high-risk, highly trained, potentially unstable. That last word was the one that stuck. Inside the safe house, Jalen watched the news in silence. His eyes were fixed on the screen, his face still. But Brianna could feel the tension rolling off of him like heat. He hadn't spoken for several minutes. "They're controlling the narrative," she finally said, sitting beside him on the cot. "They're making you the villain." His voice was low, hollow. "They need someone to point to. Someone who fits the story they've already told themselves." She nodded. "And someone to distract from the fact that Rickman and Mills assaulted an unarmed woman in broad daylight." He turned to her, his gaze sharp again. "We need to get ahead of this." Brianna stood, pacing now. "I'm working on it. I reached out to Maya in public records. She said she'll try to pull the original 911 logs, but it's risky. If the call was internal, they might have skipped the dispatcher and gone straight through. We need body cam footage, unedited." "There's a window," Jalen said. If we can find someone inside the department who doesn't buy their version of the story, we can use that. If not, we go back to my backup plan, which is... He opened one of the storage bins, revealing a second laptop and a file marked with a Delta unit number. We make the truth louder than the lie. Somewhere across town, on the 13th floor of Atlanta PD's Internal Affairs Bureau, Detective Celeste Grant leaned back in her chair, the early footage of the altercation frozen on her screen. Her brow furrowed as she scrubbed through the timeline for the third time, watching frame by frame how the officers approached Brianna, how the interaction escalated, and how quickly it was cut. The raw version hadn't been easy to access. Someone in the department had tried to overwrite it with the edited copy, but Celeste had seen enough internal sabotage over the years to know when a file had been tampered with. She'd gone digging herself, bypassing the filters, hunting the data at its root. And what she found didn't match the narrative at all. She leaned closer, paused on a frame where Brianna was flat on the ground, Rickman's hand pressed into the back of her neck. The timestamp showed several seconds before Jalen arrived. She zoomed in. No weapon, no resisting, just fear. "Officer Rickman," she muttered, glancing down at the complaint log she'd printed hours earlier. 4 citizen complaints in the past year. 3 dismissed, 1 sealed. She picked up her phone and dialed a secure extension. "IA Dispatch." The voice on the line answered. "This is Grant," she said. "I want the original shift logs for Officers Rickman and Mills, last 72 hours. Also flag any internal memos referencing the Freeman incident. Any reason you want us to tag it?" "Yes," she said, "because something about this stinks. And if the city's about to crucify a soldier and a lawyer based on edited footage and false reports, I'm not going to stand by and watch it happen." Back in the garage, Brianna paced near the small table as Jalen tapped through encrypted data logs. Her laptop showed multiple browser tabs, news stories, public comments, social media posts. The court of public opinion was already in session. "I don't know how long Maya can stall," she said. "She's risking her job." "She won't be the only one," Jalen replied. "People know what they saw, even if they're afraid to admit it." Brianna turned to him, her voice unwavering now. "Then we make it impossible for them to look away." The walls of the warehouse were lined with metal shelves covered in dusty tools, old routers, outdated hard drives, and tangled cables coiled like dormant snakes. It wasn't the kind of place that screamed precision, but Jalen knew better. The inside was chaos only to strangers. To the man who lived here, it was an arsenal. Sean Freeman sat hunched over 3 open laptops, his eyes flicking between lines of code as if they were words in a foreign language only he could read. His fingers moved quickly, navigating through encrypted pathways and bypassing firewalls with an ease that came from years of training no civilian institution would ever acknowledge. "I didn't think I'd be hearing from you again," Sean said, not looking up. "You drop out of the world for 2 years. Then suddenly, you're on every news channel. Must be serious." "It is," Jalen replied, standing near the makeshift workbench while Brianna leaned against the concrete pillar beside him, her arms crossed tightly, a small scab still darkening the corner of her mouth. Sean finally looked up. "So, what exactly are you trying to prove?" Brianna stepped forward. "That the body cam footage was doctored." Sean raised an eyebrow. "You're not wrong. I've already seen what they released. The audio's scrubbed in 3 places. Timestamps jump forward twice. Subtle enough that civilians won't catch it, but obvious if you know where to look. And the most critical thing, they cut the footage 6 seconds before your husband arrives." Jalen exhaled slowly. "So we were right." "You were right," Sean said. "But that doesn't mean proving it will be easy." The footage was altered after it left the standard evidence pipeline. Someone with internal access rerouted it from the patrol car to an off-grid server before it hit the official storage system. "Then we track the off-grid server," Brianna said. Sean gave a low whistle, leaning back in his chair. "I mean, I admire the confidence, but you don't just track a shadow server from inside the department. These things are firewalled tighter than Fort Bragg. You'd need someone who still works inside and isn't afraid of losing everything. Jalen and Brianna exchanged a glance. Brianna spoke first. What if we already have someone? At the Atlanta Police Department's Central Precinct, Officer Cal Dawson leaned against a vending machine in the break room, eyes fixed on the flashing screen of his phone. He kept the volume muted as the news segment played on repeat. Edited footage of the Buckhead incident, once again portraying Jalen as the aggressor. He paused the video and stared at the timestamp. It didn't match what he remembered. Absolutely. Here is the revised version with apostrophes added to all dialogue and text messages, while keeping the immersive tone and avoiding short sentences. Cal had been stationed at the remote feed terminal the night the footage came through. A quiet assignment, tucked away in the back hall of the precinct. The kind of place where no one asked questions unless the system went dark. He wasn't even supposed to be there. Not officially. His regular rotation had ended an hour earlier, but Officer Lenz had begged him to swap shifts so he could catch his daughter's recital. Cal had said yes without thinking, just like he always did when people assumed he had nowhere else to be. That night had been slow. Boring, even. The feed was lagging, the database overloaded with backlogs from body cams across the city. He was helping another tech clear out corrupted files when the screen flickered, just once, and a fresh feed landed in the review queue. He hadn't expected anything serious. Most of the clips that passed through were routine, traffic stops, domestic calls, noise complaints, but something about this one made him pause. The footage opened with a wide view of the sidewalk in front of the boutique. He saw a woman, black, well-dressed, clearly unarmed, walking calmly with a shopping bag in one hand. Two officers approached from the side, both white, both grinning like they already knew how it would go. Cal didn't recognize the woman at first, not until the camera angle caught her face and he realized she was a lawyer. He'd seen her on the city newsletter. Something about a civil rights panel. Then Rickman grabbed her wrist. The bag fell from her hand, landing on the concrete with a muffled thud. She stepped back, clearly startled. Her mouth moved, words forming without panic, just confusion. A plea, maybe. A question. But then Mills stepped in, his hand already reaching for cuffs. That's when she screamed. Loud and sudden. Not from pain, but from fear. From the sheer weight of disbelief that it was actually happening. Cal had watched the footage twice, frozen in his chair as the seconds unfolded. The second time, he leaned forward, eyes narrowed, replaying the exact frame when she hit the pavement, her head bouncing once against the curb. There was no resistance, no threat, no call for backup, just aggression, calculated, clean. And then the screen blinked. The file was gone. Just like that, overwritten, replaced by a corrupted placeholder that looped a static-filled snippet from another unit's traffic stop. No trace, no archive, like it never existed at all. He didn't say anything. Not that night, not the next morning. He just carried it around in his chest like a lead weight, hoping someone else had seen it too. That maybe it would show up again. That maybe, just maybe, there had been some misunderstanding. But the days passed, and the silence stretched. Then came the press conference. The footage they released showed only a brief altercation. Blurry, distant, out of context. The news anchors parroted the department's version. The suspect had resisted arrest. The male suspect had assaulted officers. The narrative was clean, rehearsed, airtight. Cal sat at his desk with the screen muted, watching his superiors lie without flinching. That night, his phone buzzed. An unknown number. The message was short. You saw it. We know. You can't ignore this. He stared at the screen for a long time, the glow of it painting his hands in cold light. His heart pounded as he scanned the empty break room. Coffee stains dotted the table beside him, the vending machine humming in the corner like nothing had changed. He set the phone down slowly, resting both hands on the table. He didn't recognize the number, but the message felt surgical, precise. Whoever sent it wasn't guessing. They knew. He picked up the phone again and typed back, his fingers unsteady. "I'm not a part of this. I don't want to be." The reply came almost instantly, as if they'd been waiting for him to break. "Then meet us. Help us fix it." He didn't move for a long time, just stared at those words while the world outside the precinct continued spinning, unaware. The voices of other officers echoed faintly from the hall. Someone was laughing near the stairwell. A door slammed 2 rooms over. His thumb hovered above the screen. He thought about the woman in the footage, Brianna, about how fast it had all happened, about how easy it was to destroy someone with a badge and a lie. He exhaled once, slow and tight, then typed back, "When and where?" Back at the warehouse, Jalen leaned over Sean's shoulder as a map of internal server routes loaded onto the screen. Brianna stood beside them, arms folded, her eyes focused. "The internal video storage pipeline has a gateway node here," Sean said, pointing to a red cluster near the precinct's administrative wing. "But the secondary signal got hijacked and rerouted through an access point reserved for internal reviews. You'd need a key code with command access." "Someone had help," Brianna murmured. "Or someone was ordered to do it," Jalen added. Sean spun his chair slightly to face them. "If you're serious about going after this, you'll need 3 things. 1, a full chain of custody for the footage, which means someone inside willing to testify about what they saw before the edit. 2, the original footage, or a fragment that wasn't scrubbed. And 3, proof of misconduct from the officers involved." "We're working on all 3, Brianna said. "Cal Dawson saw the footage before it was replaced. He just agreed to meet." Jalen glanced at her. "You trust him?" "No," she said, "but I believe he's scared, and fear makes people honest." Sean stood and crossed to the corner, opening a black case the size of a briefcase. Inside was a recording device no larger than a paperback, an untraceable field recorder designed to intercept and store any digital or audio input. "Take this with you," he said. "If he says anything useful, we log it." Jalen took the device without a word. As they prepared to leave, Sean pulled Jalen aside. "You're really doing this? Going head-to-head with the entire department?" "We don't have a choice." Sean's voice dropped. "You're not just going to burn the system. You're going to make enemies who never stop looking." Jalen's expression didn't waver. "Then let them come." Outside, the sky was deepening into violet, the city lighting up with the hum of another restless night. Somewhere inside those towers and concrete walls were the men who had tried to bury the truth. Now, Brianna and Jalen were digging it back out, piece by piece. The air inside the warehouse had shifted since Cal's message came through. It wasn't tension, it was clarity. A shared purpose had settled over the group like the final click of a locked chamber. Jalen stood over the table, arms folded, watching the encrypted message scroll to its end. Brianna sat beside him, back straight, her laptop screen open to the list of formal complaints she'd compiled against Rickman and Mills over the last 2 hours. None of them had stuck, but together they painted a story. Across the room, Sean hunched over his rig, fingers dancing across the keyboard as he encrypted another chain of files into cold storage. Every image, every frame, every audio byte pulled from internal logs and security feeds now lived inside a set of air-gapped drives he had sealed into a lead-lined case beneath the floor hatch. "I'll keep it all here," he said without turning. "Untraceable. Not even satellite can sniff it out." Jalen stepped over. "And if something happens, then it's rigged to go live," Sean replied. "Auto-dump to 3 independent press contacts and a whistleblower archive overseas. No redactions, no edits. Their truth dies with me. Ours lives on." Brianna let out a quiet breath, absorbing the weight of that backup plan. She had trusted evidence all her life. Facts, logic, testimony. But this was the first time she'd ever seen the system that held it manipulated so deliberately. The law alone wouldn't save them. The truth had to be engineered to survive the storm. A new alert blinked on Sean's screen. Cal Dawson had arrived. He stepped in through the side door, his expression taut beneath the brim of his patrol cap. He wasn't in uniform, but his posture still held the discipline of the badge. His hands fidgeted once near his jacket pocket before he tucked them into his sides. "I don't know how long I can stay," he said. "You stayed this long," Jalen replied. "That means something." Cal hesitated, then pulled a flash drive from his pocket and handed it to Sean. "I pulled this before the review server wiped it. It's not full video, just the segment from the feed router. The moment Rickman hit her, time code included." Sean plugged it in, eyes flicking across the screen. Brianna leaned forward. "Is it clean?" Sean nodded once. "Lossless. Timestamp matches the dispatch logs. No compression. This is gold." Cal didn't look proud. If anything, he looked ashamed. "I didn't speak up when I first saw it," he said. "I was afraid. Of the department. Of what it would mean to be the one who turned against the shield. But I can't watch them lie anymore. I can't let them destroy you both to cover themselves." Brianna's voice was gentle. "We don't need you to take them down. We just need you to help us catch them in the act." Cal looked at her, confused. "How?" Jalen turned to the whiteboard Sean had scrawled notes across earlier, grabbing a marker. "We use the pattern. Rickman and Mills prey on women they think they can intimidate. Black women, alone, dressed well, in the wrong neighborhood. They profile, harass, escalate. That's their routine. So we give them exactly what they want." "No," Cal said immediately. "That's too dangerous." But Brianna was already nodding. "If they believe I'm someone new, someone vulnerable, and you report me as a potential suspect like before, they'll come. They won't know they're walking into surveillance." Sean tapped the side of the case under the table. "We wire the location. 3 camera angles, 2 boom mics, plus a parabolic receiver that'll catch everything in a 40-foot radius. If they say anything that even hints at racial profiling, misconduct, or abuse, we'll have them." Cal looked between them all, his voice quiet but firm. "You understand what you're asking her to do? You're putting her back in front of the same wolves who attacked her." "She knows," Jalen said. Brianna nodded. "I'm not doing this because I want to. I'm doing it because if we don't, they'll keep doing this to other women, to other people who won't have someone like Jalen to pull them off the ground." Sean glanced back over his shoulder. "I'll prep the gear tonight. Give me a location." Cal hesitated, then nodded. "There's an abandoned diner 3 blocks off Holloway. No cameras. It's still flagged in the patrol system as quiet zone. They use it when they want to keep things unofficial." "Perfect," Jalen said. "You log the call like you did last time. Say you spotted someone matching a suspect report. Ask for Rickman and Mills. Make it look like you're trying to help them clean it up quiet." "And when it's done?" Cal asked. Brianna stepped forward. "We take the footage to someone who can't ignore it. Public defenders, press, internal affairs, whatever it takes. And we release it in full. Unedited." Sean's voice was calm, but heavy. "Once the trap is sprung, I'll hold the master file. If anything happens to either of you, it goes out to the world. No press spin, no filters." Cal glanced down at his badge. "I never thought it would come to this," he said. "Neither did we," Jalen replied. "But here we are, and together, in the dim light of the warehouse, the plan took shape. Not just to clear their names, but to expose the system that had been protecting predators in uniform for far too long. The wolves had hunted in the dark. Now it was their turn to step into the light. The air inside the warehouse was sharp with tension, every breath filled with a quiet anticipation that buzzed between the 4 of them. A soft click echoed as Sean Freeman slipped the final encrypted microdrive into its case and locked it into place beneath the trapdoor hatch. In the corner, Jalen stood with his arms crossed, eyes locked on the whiteboard where the plan had taken form. Bullet points, timestamps, building schematics, all written with the meticulous care of a soldier preparing for a mission where failure wasn't an option. Cal Dawson stood near the center of the room, his phone in hand, staring down at the contact on the screen. "You sure about this?" he asked, his voice low, shoulders tense beneath his coat. "You're the only one who can do it," Jalen replied. They won't come unless the message comes from someone they trust. Brianna stepped forward, composed and calm. Make it sound real, familiar, not too polished. Give them exactly what they want to hear. Cal swallowed hard and nodded, then pressed the call button. The room fell into silence, except for the distant hum of the server fans. The line rang once, twice. On the third ring, a gruff voice answered. "Rickman." Cal took a shallow breath and let his voice fall into that familiar rhythm. Just casual enough to disarm, just official enough to sound routine. "Hey, it's Dawson. Got something strange just now. I figured you might want to take a look at before it goes up the chain." A pause. Then Rickman's voice sharpened. "What kind of strange?" Cal paced slowly as he spoke, moving like someone thinking aloud. "Woman matching the Freeman wife's profile. Black. Early 30s, dressed sharp, walking fast near Holloway, looked like she didn't want to be seen. Slipped into the old diner, the one that got shut down after the health code violations." Rickman made a low sound in his throat, half skeptical, half intrigued. "That's 2 blocks from the Freeman footage dump spot." "Exactly," Cal said. "Could be coincidence. Could be someone trying to move something sensitive while the department's still in cleanup mode. She's carrying a leather case, sat in the back corner and hasn't looked up since." There was a beat of silence on the other end. Then Rickman's tone shifted, amused. "And you're calling me why, exactly?" Cal let the bait slip forward carefully. "Because this feels like one of those things that could either disappear clean or blow up in someone's face. And I know you've been looking for a chance to handle things off paper." Rickman chuckled, low and smug. "You think it's her?" "No," Cal replied. "I think it's someone connected to her. Maybe trying to clean up loose ends. Or maybe bait. Either way, it's quiet. No cameras, no backup. You and Mills come in quiet. You might get something worth handing off to the higher-ups. Or not. I don't care. Just figured I'd throw it your way before I report it officially." "You sure she's alone?" Rickman asked. "Watched her go in myself," Cal lied smoothly. "She hasn't moved. Case is still on the table. Looks expensive. She's nervous, but trying not to show it." Another pause. Then Rickman's voice turned confident. "All right, don't do anything. We'll be there in 20. He hung up. Cal lowered the phone slowly and turned to face the others. "They're coming." The diner was dark and hollow, stripped of its old furnishings and left with only shadows and dust for company. But the bones were still there. The booths, the counter, the smeared windows that let in fractured afternoon light. Brianna sat in the back corner as planned, posture relaxed but alert, her sweater draped neatly across her shoulders, the leather case beside her giving the illusion of purpose. Above her, a pinhole camera tucked into the ceiling vent watched every movement. 2 more were hidden inside a ceiling light, and the leg of a table against the far wall. Sean's custom field mics had been calibrated for directional clarity, their receivers already feeding live into the laptop back in the surveillance van parked a block away. "Cameras are live," Sean said over the comm. "Audio clean. You're clear to roll." Jalen's voice came next, steady and low in her earpiece. "I'm outside. Visual sweep every 10. I've got you." Brianna said nothing. She sat still, breathing in slow rhythm, eyes flicking occasionally toward the door, then returning to the worn leather strap of the case at her side. Her palms rested open on her lap. She didn't have to fake the tension in her stomach. She just had to wait. The cruiser arrived exactly 18 minutes later, pulling up without headlights, tires whispering over gravel. Rickman stepped out first. The corners of his coat tugged down with self-importance. Mills followed, slower, shoulders hunched. "Looks like she's still inside," Rickman muttered, glancing toward the diner. "You see the case?" "Yeah," Mills said quietly. "Right on the table." Rickman smirked. "Bet it's nothing. But let's have a little fun before we call it in." They entered the diner without drawing their weapons. This wasn't that kind of encounter. Not yet. Rickman moved with that deliberate air of control, the kind of posture that came from years of unchecked authority. When he spotted her, he smiled. "Well, well," he said, stepping into her space without invitation. "What brings someone like you to a place like this?" Brianna didn't flinch. She met his gaze. "Waiting on a ride." Rickman nodded toward the case. "That your delivery?" "Client files." He chuckled. "Mind if I take a peek?" "I do," she said. "You don't have a warrant." Rickman lowered his voice. "You don't really think warrants apply here, do you?" Behind the glass of a nearby utility lamp, the camera blinked twice, still recording. "You're not the first one to sit in that booth thinking the law would shield them," Rickman continued. "Let me guess. You're another activist? Got a blog? Maybe an audience?" Brianna didn't answer. Mills stood silently nearby, his arms folded, gaze flicking nervously toward the back exit. Rickman stepped closer. "See? People like you come into our city thinking you're above the rules, but we're the ones who write the rules. We decide who walks and who gets walked out." "Interesting," Brianna said coolly. "You don't sound like someone sworn to serve and protect." Rickman leaned in. "Protect who? People like you? You think I didn't know the kind of trouble you and your husband would bring the second I saw you two in that shop?" His voice dropped lower. "You weren't supposed to fight back. You were supposed to fold. Disappear, like the rest." Then, a voice cut through the silence behind him. "You just admitted it all." Rickman froze. Jalen stepped into the light, his expression hard, focused. Behind him, Cal Dawson emerged, holding up his badge. "Every word," Cal said, his voice steady. "All recorded, all stored, all time-stamped." Rickman's mouth opened, but no words came. For the first time, the control he always wielded like a weapon had been ripped from his grasp. Brianna stood slowly, lifting the leather case and resting it on her arm. "We didn't need you to believe we were guilty," she said. "We just needed you to believe you were untouchable." And for the first time, Rickman understood that he wasn't. Rickman's breath came hard and fast as the weight of what just happened crashed down around him. His hands twitched near his belt, not quite reaching for his weapon, but no longer pretending to be calm either. His jaw clenched so tightly it seemed he might crack his own teeth. "You set us up," he spat, the words cracking against the stale air inside the diner. This was entrapment. Cal Dawson stood beside the door, his badge still out, his stance unreadable. "No," he said firmly. "This was exposure, and you gave us everything we needed." Mills looked shaken now, pale around the eyes. "Rick, we should go. We need to—" "We're not going anywhere," Rickman snapped. He pointed at Jalen. "You're a thug. You jumped us, put 2 cops in the hospital." "You were beating my wife on a public street," Jalen replied, voice cold. "What did you think was going to happen?" Rickman turned to Brianna, his face red, his fury barely restrained. "You think this little show changes anything? That anyone's gonna believe a couple of criminals with a grudge and a camera?" Brianna stepped forward, unshaken. Her voice was like iron wrapped in velvet. "They're going to believe every second, because we have more than one camera, more than one feed, more than your voice bragging about targeting women who look like me." Rickman sneered. "Your word against ours. You doctored that video, just like you doctored the first one." Her eyes didn't flinch. "You're right about one thing," she said. "The first video was doctored. Not by us, by you. The body cam footage from that day. We tracked the metadata. It was pulled from your unit and routed through a private review server that doesn't exist in the department's official directory. The audio was compressed. The timestamp skipped." She stepped closer, each word cutting sharper than the last. "But what you didn't count on is that someone saved a copy of the raw feed before it disappeared. We have that too. The real footage, the missing 6 seconds, the part where you slammed me to the ground while I was already cuffed. The part where you said, and I quote, 'This is a message.'" Rickman's mouth moved, but no words came. "You're lying," he muttered. "No," Cal said. "She's not. I saw it myself. That's what made me come forward." Mills looked like he might be sick. Rickman took a half-step forward, his chest puffed, trying to reclaim dominance. "You want to drag me down in the media? You want to go to war with me? Fine. You better pray, Nothing leaks about you two that you didn't mean to come out. Brianna smiled then, not cruel, not gloating, but with the quiet confidence of a woman who had walked through hell and survived it. We didn't come here to gloat, Rickman. We came here to give you a chance to hear what's coming before the rest of the world does. She reached into the leather case on the table and pulled out a single envelope, placing it down gently in front of him. Inside is a summary of every complaint ever filed against you, she said, including the ones that never made it past internal review. You remember Dina Wallace, high school teacher? Pulled over on her way to her night class? Report dismissed. I found her. She gave a sworn statement. Rickman's hands were fists now, knuckles white. You don't want this to go any further, he hissed. It already has, Jalen said, stepping beside his wife. You just don't know it yet. Cal opened the diner door. You can walk out now, or you can be walked out later. Rickman stared at them, but for all his bluster, for all his years of power, something inside him understood. This was over. He grabbed the envelope and stalked past them, brushing Cal's shoulder as he passed through the doorway. Mills lingered a moment longer. He looked at Brianna, then at Jalen, then finally down at the floor. I didn't mean for it to go that far, he mumbled. Brianna met his eyes. But you let it. He nodded once and left. Back at the warehouse, Sean was already scrubbing through the final capture footage, syncing it with the recovered raw body cam file from Cal's flash drive. The difference was unmistakable. The department's version skipped, blurred, compressed the truth until it was convenient. The raw file showed everything. Her voice pleading for them to stop, Rickman's violence, the crowd forming, Jalen's approach. Unedited, it was damning. Combined with the footage from the sting, it was career-ending. Sean leaned back in his chair, jaw set. They're going to bury this. Mark my words. Then we bury them first, Jalen replied. Brianna stood near the screen, arms folded. Let's make this loud. Sean launched the first upload. He sent the raw diner footage to a secure legal channel, embedded it with metadata tracing it to their recovery. Then, the full timeline video, the original incident, synced side by side with the tampered body cam footage and the uncut sting recording. He submitted them to legal outlets, journalists, whistleblower sites. He also copied the files onto an international backup node. They'll never get it all down, he said. Even if they try, the internet doesn't forget. The next morning, the Freeman name wasn't whispered in suspicion. It was shouted. Leaked video confirms racist Atlanta officers. Altered body cam footage. New footage reveals pattern of abuse. Cover-up in city police department. Civil rights. Lawyer and Delta vet bait their abusers and win. Protests erupted downtown within hours. Public defenders called for an independent investigation. Civil rights attorneys filed emergency injunctions. And by nightfall, Rickman and Mills were both suspended without pay, pending criminal charges. Internal Affairs had no choice but to act. Too many people were watching. Too much truth was now public. Inside the Freeman safe house, the three of them sat in quiet, watching the coverage unfold in real time. Brianna's face was calm, but her eyes held the weight of everything they had been forced to endure. Jalen reached for her hand and held it without a word. We said we'd make it loud, she murmured. Jalen looked at her and smiled faintly. We're just getting started. And somewhere, beneath the rubble of power and silence, the first stone had cracked loose. The sound of Rickman's voice still echoed in Brianna's mind long after the diner door had shut behind him. His words, the smirk, the certainty, the venom in his tone, weren't just offensive. They were familiar. The kind of language that had always operated behind closed doors, hidden beneath polished uniforms and clipped professionalism, but now it wasn't hidden. Now it was recorded, exposed, undeniable, and the fallout had already begun. Sean didn't sleep. He sat through the night at the console in the corner of the safe house, archiving footage, duplicating files, distributing copies to encrypted back channels and verified legal servers. He wasn't just protecting evidence, he was ensuring survival. The kind of survival that didn't come from strength or hiding. It came from visibility. Once it was out there, they couldn't kill it. Jalen kept watch near the street-facing window, standing in the shadows, his mind running through protocols he hadn't used in years. Though there was no sign of police presence nearby, the energy in the city was shifting. The silence outside was different now. Not the quiet of tension, but the quiet before something big breaks open. By morning, the footage had spread far beyond their reach. It showed up first on social media, short clips at first, posted by anonymous accounts. Then came the full versions, the uncut diner recording, the raw body cam file recovered by Cal Dawson, and the chilling side-by-side comparison showing how the department had trimmed, compressed, and rerouted evidence. Each video told its own story. Together, they told the truth. Inside her corner of the safe house, Brianna watched the headlines evolve in real time. She didn't refresh the screen out of curiosity. She did it because she needed to see that the world was finally seeing what she had always known. That power left unchecked did not protect. It destroyed. And for too long, men like Rickman had been allowed to write the narrative. The public reaction was immediate. National outlets scrambled to cover the story. Cable news networks ran split-screen panels. Activists shared the footage with the caption, "This is what accountability looks like when you fight back." Protests ignited by afternoon. Outside City Hall, hundreds gathered with signs bearing her name. Some wore shirts with still frames from the video, Rickman's hand reaching across the table, his words frozen in caption. Others held posters that read simply, "Let the truth speak." Not everyone responded with support. The city's police union released a vague statement condemning unauthorized recordings and baiting tactics. Certain voices on local radio tried to question whether Brianna and Jalen had provoked the officers. But it didn't matter. The footage was clear. The system could deny it. The people wouldn't. At the Atlanta Police Department's Internal Affairs Bureau, Detective Celeste Grant sat in her office, her posture rigid as she reviewed the footage for the 5th time. The video didn't need commentary. Rickman's voice was damning enough. His words about targeting women who looked like Brianna, his casual confession about deleting inconvenient footage, his open disdain for the law he was sworn to uphold, and Mills, silent but complicit, standing nearby without stepping in. Celeste didn't hesitate. She pulled up the digital case folder and attached her final findings. She submitted a formal request to place both officers on indefinite suspension pending criminal review. Then she walked the report straight to the commissioner's office and placed it on his desk without a word. Across the city, other institutions were waking up too, some in shame, others in self-preservation. Brianna's law firm had been watching the story unfold with growing discomfort. In the weeks following her detainment, they had quietly suspended her, citing the need to investigate conduct after she'd been arrested. But now, with her name appearing on every major outlet alongside headlines praising her bravery and discipline, that decision had become a liability. Inside the firm's glass conference room, senior partners reviewed a drafted apology. It had been rewritten 3 times. Finally, one of them stood and read it aloud without emotion. "We deeply regret our initial response to attorney Brianna Freeman's detainment. Her actions were not only justified, they were courageous. Our failure to stand by her at the time does not reflect the values we claim to uphold. We offer our public apology and full reinstatement." The statement was released online within the hour. Brianna received it on her phone, but didn't respond. She had already moved on in her mind. Apologies after public shame weren't apologies. They were damage control. That same afternoon, Jalen received a message on his encrypted line. The contact was listed only as Echo, a name he hadn't seen since his last classified op overseas. The message was brief. "We saw the drop. You did good. The kind of good they don't always reward. If it gets hot, say the word. "You and your wife won't be alone." Jalen read it twice. He didn't need extraction, not yet, but knowing he still had eyes watching from the shadows reminded him that justice didn't always wear a badge. Sometimes it wore silence and waited for the right moment to act. Later that evening, a government vehicle pulled into a secured entrance beneath the courthouse. Inside, Jalen and Brianna sat together, dressed plainly but carrying the weight of a movement. They had been called to testify, and neither hesitated. It wasn't just about clearing their names. It was about closing a door that had stayed open far too long. They entered the hearing chamber to a room full of tension. Celeste Grant sat near the front, hands folded, flanked by legal counsel and representatives from the Civilian Oversight Board. Rickman was there too, seated stiffly behind his attorney. Mills sat beside him, pale and tight-lipped, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. The courtroom was full but quiet. The air was heavy, the kind of stillness that feels like it might crack from the weight of what hasn't been said. Along the back wall, members of the public, press, and city officials watched with careful eyes. Everyone knew the stakes. Everyone knew what this day meant. Brianna was called first. She stood slowly, smoothing the front of her blazer as she approached the witness stand. Her heels clicked steadily against the polished floor. She did not tremble. She did not blink too much. She took her oath with a clear voice and met the prosecutor's gaze head-on. When asked what happened, she didn't begin with the diner, or the sting, or even the arrest. She began with the sidewalk. "The first time they saw me," she said, "I was walking out of a store. I had just finished buying a dress for an anniversary dinner. I wasn't loud. I wasn't suspicious. I was just there, and that was enough." The room held still as she recounted how Rickman and Mills approached her with false politeness that quickly turned invasive, how they called her aggressive when she said no, how they accused her of stealing, how the handcuffs bit into her wrists while strangers walked by and did nothing. She described the moment her body hit the concrete, how her breath had left her lungs, how her voice had cracked when she tried to ask why. "They treated me like I was a problem, not a person, not a lawyer, not a woman, just a problem." The defense objected once, overruled. When the footage from that day played, the real footage, the one Cal Dawson had risked everything to preserve, it was met with a deep, collective silence. The clip filled the screen above the judge's bench. The original body cam angle, shaky but uncut, showed Rickman slam Brianna to the ground after she had already been cuffed. The sound of her voice, calm, clear, pleading, cut through the courtroom like a blade. Then came the diner footage. Every word Rickman said, every arrogant smirk, every casual confession. The entire room heard him speak with complete confidence about how body cams could be used or buried depending on the story you want to tell. They heard him call Brianna another mouthy little girl. They heard him say, the law worked for people like him, not her. When the video stopped, no one spoke. Not right away. Then Rickman's attorney stood, desperate to regain control, calling the footage an ambush, questioning the ethics of a staged encounter. That's when Brianna stood again. "Staged," she said, stepping forward. "The only thing staged here was the lie you told the public when you edited the footage from my arrest. The only thing false was the story you wrote when you thought I wouldn't fight back." The judge raised a hand, but before he could speak, Rickman did. He rose suddenly from his seat, his voice louder than anyone expected. "You think you're a hero," he shouted, pointing at Brianna. "You set us up. You baited us like animals." Jalen stood immediately from the gallery, instinct drawing him forward. But Brianna raised one hand gently, her eyes never leaving Rickman. Rickman kept going, his voice cracking under pressure. "I've served 20 years. I've taken bullets for this city. And now I'm the villain because some woman with a camera wanted to make a name for herself? You made your name a long time ago," Brianna replied, her voice steady. "I just showed the world what it meant." The judge ordered Rickman to be seated. His attorney tried to calm him, but the damage had already been done. His outburst had only confirmed what everyone in the room had just seen on video. The courtroom took a breath it hadn't realized it was holding. The proceedings moved quickly from there. Mills chose not to speak. His head bowed as his charges were read. Cal Dawson testified quietly, clearly, recounting the moment he saw the altered body cam feed vanish from the server, and the moment he knew the cover-up had begun. His voice didn't tremble either. He simply told the truth, because he was done carrying the burden of silence. Celeste Grant's name was read into the record next, not to testify, but to acknowledge her role in the investigation. The judge publicly commended her for refusing to ignore evidence, even when it meant challenging her own department. Then, finally, the verdict came. The jury deliberated less than 2 hours. Both Rickman and Mills were found guilty on all counts. Rickman's sentencing was swift. 7 years in federal prison for obstruction, evidence tampering, and civil rights violations, with no chance of early release. Mills received a lesser but still significant sentence: 3 years for willful negligence and failure to intervene, with mandatory retraining before any potential reinstatement, though no one expected him to wear a badge again. The courtroom emptied slowly. Reporters moved like quiet waves around the hallways, their questions now pointed elsewhere, no longer grasping at doubt, no longer spinning theories. They were simply chasing what had already been proven. Outside, the protesters were cheering, as if the verdict itself had exhaled into the streets. The chant had changed from anger to affirmation. We saw it. We believed her. Justice for Brianna. Respect for Jalen. Truth doesn't blink. Inside the courthouse, the air had softened, but the exhaustion hung heavy. For all their composure in the courtroom, Brianna and Jalen now moved with the kind of fatigue that only truth-tellers understood. They weren't broken, but they were marked by every stare, every false report, every threat that almost buried them. Still, their steps were even, side by side, moving together through the long hallway that led to the exit. It was there, near the final bend, that they saw him. Rickman stood alone near the far wall, away from the crowd, just beyond the shadow of the last column. He no longer wore a uniform, no longer held the kind of posture that demanded space. His suit jacket was loose at the shoulders now. His hands were at his sides, and his eyes were darker than before, not with fury, but with something closer to disbelief. A man who had been stripped not just of his title, but of the story he'd built around himself. He didn't move as they approached. He didn't speak. Jalen slowed first. Brianna matched his pace, her eyes narrowing slightly, not in fear, but in clarity. This wasn't an ambush. It wasn't a threat. There were officers nearby, court staff in the distance, but none of them mattered in that moment. Only the three of them existed in that narrow stretch of corridor. Rickman looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time without performance, without posturing. There was no apology in his eyes, no defiance either, just the uncomfortable weight of being seen. Brianna didn't look away. She didn't speak. There were no last words to offer him, no need to declare victory, no interest in giving him anything more than what he'd already handed them. His truth, his confession, his collapse. Jalen's gaze didn't soften. He stood tall beside his wife, and though his fists didn't clench, his presence carried the quiet warning that had been there from the beginning. You were never stronger than us. Rickman looked down first, and then, slowly, he turned and walked away. His steps small, his frame folding inward like a man who no longer recognized himself. The Freemans kept walking, past the courtroom doors, past the final line of reporters waiting for a quote that would never come, down the courthouse steps, where the crowd paused and parted like water. Cheers rose behind them, warm and wide, but neither Brianna nor Jalen waved. They didn't raise fists or call out. They just walked through it, together, hand in hand. The ride home was quiet, no flashing lights behind them, no eyes in the rear view, just the steady hum of the road and the occasional thud of memory pressing against silence. The city rolled by in slow frames, Places that had once been normal now held the echoes of something else. The city rolled by in slow frames. Places that had once been normal now held the echoes of something else. But they weren't ghosts. Not anymore. They were scars. And scars were proof of survival. Brianna leaned her head against the window, watching the light fade as they passed beneath overpasses and street lamps. I don't know if I expected it to feel different. Jalen kept his eyes on the road. It doesn't feel like a win. She nodded slowly. It feels like release. They pulled into the driveway just after dusk. The porch light had been left on, a soft halo spilling across the front steps. Sean had made sure the place was secured earlier that day, sweeping the perimeter twice before heading back to his own apartment. The house was exactly as they'd left it. Familiar, still, waiting. Inside, the air smelled like cedar and coffee grounds. The clock on the wall ticked gently. Brianna paused in the foyer, setting her keys down, her gaze drifting toward the small bookshelf near the hallway. A framed photo of their wedding sat near the edge. Crooked, but unbroken. She reached out, straightened it with one hand, and smiled faintly. Jalen came up behind her, wrapping an arm around her waist. "We're home," he said, and this time there was no fear in the word. They didn't unpack right away. They didn't make calls or check updates or scroll through news. They simply sat together in the living room, lights low, a blanket over their knees, silence stretching gently between them. Outside, the world was still loud. Commentary, analysis, statements from politicians, editorial headlines. People arguing about what came next, what needed to change, what systems needed to fall and which needed to be rebuilt. But in that moment, none of that reached them. In that moment, they were simply Jalen and Brianna Freeman, two people who had held on to each other through fire, who had been hunted and humiliated, who had refused to let the lie win. They hadn't chosen the fight, but they had finished it. And though bruised in ways the world might never fully understand, they were not broken. Not even close. In the weeks that followed the trial, the city didn't sleep. The courthouse remained surrounded by people, some protesting for broader change, others simply standing in quiet witness to the moment they'd lived to see. News anchors filled screens with commentary. Lawyers and activists debated reforms on morning shows, and elected officials scrambled to prove they had always been on the right side of history. But in the Freeman home, where the weight had been carried far longer than the public had realized, things moved differently. Brianna didn't celebrate. Neither did Jalen. There were no victory parties, no media appearances, no interviews in front of the camera. They had fought for their names, for their lives, and for each other. Not for recognition, but for peace. And now, with the trial behind them and the truth out in the world, they turned inward, not to retreat, but to rebuild. Outside their door, the city kept talking, but inside, they were silent in a way that felt sacred. It was the silence of relief, of stillness, of mourning spent not looking over their shoulders. The silence wasn't empty. It was full, with breath, with safety, with the understanding that they had survived the worst and come out stronger. Cal Dawson received his promotion quietly, just as he had expected. There was no press release, no public speech, no handshake in front of a podium. A folded envelope arrived at his desk with a formal seal and a simple title change. He had been appointed Civilian Oversight Liaison, a newly created position intended to serve as the bridge between the community and the department that had for too long refused to listen. Cal didn't say much about the promotion. He showed up early, read every report he was given, and kept a notepad full of names, dates, and complaint numbers that had been ignored for years. He understood exactly what his job required. He knew it wasn't about salvaging the reputation of a broken system. It was about protecting the people who had been broken by it. Celeste Grant received more attention. She was publicly honored by the city for her role in the Freeman investigation, praised by civic leaders and community groups for her refusal to look away when the truth became inconvenient. But she didn't linger in the spotlight. She declined most interviews, ignored the attention, and stayed focused on the work. When the mayor's office invited her to accept a commendation, she attended only because she wanted to speak. Standing at the podium, looking out at a room full of people who had either fought with her or tried to discredit her, she didn't talk about herself. She talked about the Freemans. "This wasn't a system correcting itself," she said. "It was two people forcing accountability where it didn't want to exist. We owe them more than words. We owe them action. We owe them change." And with that, she stepped down. Back at home, Brianna began writing again. Not case notes, not legal briefs, but something more deliberate. She pulled from old trial transcripts, from statements she had once written in the middle of the night while still nursing bruises, and from the flood of letters and emails now arriving from women across the country who had seen the footage and recognized themselves in her story. One afternoon, she received a message from a former colleague in legal aid, asking if she would consider advising a group of first-year law students organizing around civil rights defense. The request was small, almost casual. But when she accepted the invitation and listened to the students describe their fears and questions, something lit inside her. A familiar fire. Not the kind that burns to destroy, but the kind that burns to illuminate. With support from Jalen and guidance from Sean, who helped her navigate the digital side of launching an organization, Brianna opened the doors to what would soon become the Freeman Foundation for Civil Defense. It was built modestly. 2 rooms in a brick office space near the courthouse, a few borrowed desks, 1 copier that jammed every other morning. But what they lacked in luxury, they made up for in purpose. The foundation became a place where people could come before they were accused, where families could find resources before trials began, and where young attorneys could learn how to fight not just with law books, but with empathy, clarity, and relentless discipline. Brianna wasn't looking to be a symbol. She simply wanted to be what she hadn't had when she needed it most. An advocate who understood exactly what was at stake. While she built in one direction, Jalen built in another. It started one weekend when he passed an old gym near the edge of the neighborhood. The sign had faded, the windows were boarded up, and weeds had climbed the fence around the lot. But inside, the structure was solid. The beams were intact, the foundation was good. That was all he needed. He purchased the space quietly, renovated it slowly, and by the end of summer, he had opened Iron Root, a self-defense and discipline program for black boys across the city, who were growing up in a world that often misunderstood their strength and feared their presence. Jalen didn't train them to fight for sport. He trained them to know when to walk away, how to stay calm when they were being provoked, how to protect themselves not just physically, but mentally. He brought in trusted friends, former medics, military teammates, educators with no interest in glamour, but every interest in building resilience. Some of the boys who came through his doors didn't speak much at first. Others acted out, still carrying the weight of things they couldn't explain. But Jalen knew how to speak without words. He offered structure, he offered respect, and in return, they learned what it meant to carry themselves with purpose. Every evening, when the mats were rolled up and the boys had gone home, Jalen locked the door, walked back home, and placed his key beside Brianna's on the kitchen table. They moved like this, parallel paths that always led back to each other. Their love had changed. It wasn't louder or grander. It was steadier, sharper, woven now with the thread of something earned rather than assumed. They didn't need to say what they'd been through to understand each other. The way Brianna rested her hand on Jalen's chest when he stood too long in silence said enough. The way he poured her tea in the morning before she asked said the rest. They had come through the fire, not untouched, not unscarred, but whole. The world outside still spun with noise, with politics and promises and slow reforms that might take years to settle. But the Freemans didn't wait for the world to finish healing. They had already started on their own, and in the foundation walls they raised, in the gym floors they swept, In the small, quiet acts of rebuilding a life that had been threatened but not erased, they proved something more powerful than any verdict. Justice had not been handed to them. They had reached for it with open wounds, dragged it into the light with their bare hands, and held it until it couldn't be taken back. And now, it lived, not just in their names, but in everything they chose to build next. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share it with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.